Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
Live from the NAMM Show, my guests today are Joey Stuckey and Jay Pocknell.
Hello, hello.
Jay works with an organization in the UK called Sound Without Sight. I had to actually cheat and look at his shirt to tell you that.
That is cheating.
And Joey, where are you based again? You're based in...
I'm in Macon, Georgia.
Macon, Georgia.
I'm actually the official music ambassador for my hometown. And if you don't know Macon, Georgia, you know our music. Little Richard, Otis Redding, and of course the Allman Brothers are not from there, but they lived there for about a decade. So
yes, indeed.
Yeah, a lot of good music.
You have a local softball team there called Macon Bacon,
The
which I always love.
Bacon, absolutely.
I've never heard that.
Absolutely, and everything's better with bacon.
Of course, of course. Let's focus on what you guys do, because you are both really strong ambassadors for the visually impaired.
Right.
And there are some obvious questions in terms of what your struggles are, but that's, I think, stuff that people can find out anywhere. I'm more interested in the challenges that people don't necessarily think about. It's one thing to be able to put yourself in somebody's shoes from a perspective of, well, what if I were? It's quite a different thing going through it day to day. Years ago, I worked with a songwriter, and she had been wheelchair bound since she was 2 years old. I was at an event with her, and something happened that really struck me. We were having a conversation, and at the same time, they were just bringing in some food. And somebody mentioned something, oh, that really smells good. And one of the people we were standing there with said, oh, you know, I don't have a sense of smell. And she, of all people, said, wow, I can't imagine what that's like. And her sister turned to her and said, you've been in a wheelchair your entire life, and yet you have that empathy for someone else. Does this increase your awareness of stuff that other people might not even think about, and in what ways?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's interesting you say that, because I always thought that my brothers and sisters in wheelchairs were taken care of, because there's this illusion that you have these handicap accessible bathrooms, you have the ramps in restaurants and stuff. But so I thought, oh, wonderful, that's been taken care of. There's code for this, right? You have to have certain things. But then I ended up in a wheelchair. I'm a brain tumor survivor, and a latent issue from that destroyed one of my hips and put me in a wheelchair for a while. And what I found out was that indeed most of the stuff was not up to code. That the ramps were not flush with the pavement, so when you're rolling around, and believe me, a blind man in a wheelchair is complicated. So you know, rolling around, and you would jerk, you would almost be thrown out of your seat, hitting the sidewalk, and then you try to. They had rails in the bathrooms, but you couldn't get the wheelchair through the door sometimes. So it made me realize. This is back in my late 20s. You know, I was around 28 years old. It made me realize that we shouldn't assume that everybody's taken care of. And it was a real eye-opener for me, because I always thought, well, wonderful, that's something we don't have to worry about. So from that moment on, I always try to think about, and it's impossible to think of everything, but I always try to think about, you know, well, what if I needed this? What are some needs that I might not think about because I don't have them myself? I don't have that issue. What are some things I might not think about? So it is something that I work really hard on. And one of the things that I'm working on now is building a new studio. I have a current commercial facility, but I'm trying to build a new studio. And one of the things that I'm really working on is getting with the disabled population and asking them, what would you like to find in a creative space that would take a burden from your shoulders as far as accessibility goes? And there's a lot of things I never thought about. People that are neurodiverse, you know, all kinds. I mean, the wheelchair access, the blind access makes a lot of sense to me, because I've experienced those things. And I also, by the way, can't smell. which makes me the perfect husband, by the way, because my wife always looks and smells amazing. But anyway, yeah, so I mean, it is really, I think, incumbent to try and think about those things as much as you can. Again, you can't think of everything. I mean, that's not possible. But that's the wonderful thing about, being able to be part of a community, is that you're able to outreach and say, hey, what things have I not thought of here? What things? So one of the things that came to light when I started asking those questions is people that are shorter of stature. Trying to reach all the way across a console to get to the top gain knob. So in the new facility, we're going to have furniture that tilts. Everything's going to be able to tilt, and you're going to be able to reach it. So that's just one little thing that just from having that on my mind, like what? Because I'm a pretty tall guy. I got long arms. That's never been a problem for me. But if you're shorter of stature, that's a problem.
I worked for a while designing products, and when you're designing products, you always go through the what ifs.
Yeah.
But there is inevitably stuff that you'll miss, and you'll miss it because you just don't have that same perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, and Joey, you in particular, I know, I've seen some of your posts about this. There's gear that is designed a certain way, especially when we get into software.
Oh, yeah.
Where, there's just stuff that, you have to say, well, what about this? And all the time, there's just these inevitabilities that we haven't thought of, not because we're not conscious of it, but because we just can't put ourselves in that position.
Well, the thing is, most people that I encounter are people of good intent. And so I never have felt like, I was being left out on purpose. But one of the things that shocks everybody, Jay, maybe you can talk about this too, see if you've had the same experience. One of the things that shocks everybody is that blind people can't use a mouse. And since everything is so screen driven, that's a real shock for most people. And we have to use keyboard commands, which is fine. Actually, it's faster. But you end up contorting your hands like this because there's all these, Alt, Insert, Shift, J, F1.
Right.
It's like because all the DAWs have native commands. All the OSs have native commands. Then you got the script commands, and so it gets crazy.
How about control surfaces?
Well, the real problem with that, at least, now Jay, you can see a little bit. I'm not sure you're exactly.
Yeah, so I've got some sight. I'm partially sighted.
Yeah.
So right now I can see that you're there, and I can see that you're there, Daniel.
Good.
Kind of beyond the meter, everything's pretty blurry.
Got it.
So it's a funny one for me. It's almost like a bit of an identity thing. 'Cause it's not. I don't really feel sighted, but I don't feel blind.
Understood.
And that's difficult for other people as well. If it's difficult for me, then it's going to definitely be difficult for other people to kind of
try and
you're sighted.
Compartmentalize.
Which community do I fit into?
Well,
it's an interesting thing to wrestle with, and I think like you were talking about just then, I don't exclusively use a mouse or a keyboard. It's a combination of the two.
You can use sometimes you can do some things with one. And what's funny about that is that when it comes to finding your community and making people understand what your needs are. Blind is this very nebulous word that means a lot to a lot of different people. And that's kind of tricky to navigate because, some people think you say blind, you can't see at all.
Yeah.
But if you say visually impaired, most people think, well, maybe you can see a little. So it's a real difficult language.
There is that language is something to wrestle with. I think that RNIB, so that's another organisation I work for in the UK, Royal National Institute of Blind People. One of their taglines at the moment is that 90% of blind people can see something.
Right.
So just trying to kind of rebrand blindness a little bit to be more inclusive.
And that's a difficult. That's a difficult proposition.
It is absolutely, because then there's a risk there of potentially excluding people who can't see anything at all. Maybe there might be developers creating solutions that, if they create something that only suits people who can't see anything at all, or like a high contrast mode that supports low vision users, like there's a danger that, thinking one of those things will solve it for everyone.
Well, there's a nuance there.
There is.
And interestingly, I have a dear friend named Richard McCready who's an amazing educator. And he's got really good vision, except for one thing. He cannot tell blues from greens. And he was using a product, a wonderful product from a company, but unfortunately, they were saying, well, click the blue dot when you want this and click the green dot when you want that.
Oops.
And he can't do that. So what it made me realize was the user customizability of a product is really important as we move forward, because if he could change that mode from saying blue and green to circle and square, maybe, right? Or black and white, or whatever, then he would be able to tailor his experience to suit his. He doesn't consider himself visually impaired at all, but he is colorblind between green and blue,
which is a critical thing.
Yeah. You're just starting to see music product designers take this stuff on board, which is great.
Oh, I love it. I'm so excited.
So, yeah, Focusrite in there. And in the Muse group. So Muse Score, and I think coming to Audacity too, color themes, where the user can choose what their kind of highlight color is, rather than having that completely prescribed.
Now, for me, of course, it doesn't. None of that matters. I don't really care.
Well, and now what about stuff? What about haptic feedback and things like that? Is that helpful, or is that more confusing?
Jay, I mean, you tell me what you think. I love haptics. I think, and Jay and I, we were just talking about this before we got started. I feel like that we're asked, as a blind person, we're asking our ears to do a lot. So think about this. You've got the music you're trying to listen to, or sound design, whatever it is. You've then got your screen reader that you're listening to yap in the background. Now you're trying to listen to an audio peak meter. There is an audio peak meter that will ping a tone when it hit clips or whatever. But now you've got all these things you're trying to get your ears to do.
Yeah.
So if we can split that off and use a haptic, I mean, like my toothbrush has haptics in it. It vibrates when it's time for me to switch the side of my mouth I'm brushing. My wife, when she drives, if she gets a little bit, and of course she never does this. I'm doing air quotes. I'm really bad at them because I just learned them. I didn't know that was a thing for like a week ago. So she never does this. But if she ever drifts off the center line, her seat vibrates.
Yes.
So I think haptics are amazing. Now, what do you think about them?
I love haptics too. I think when you're trying to design for a sensory loss or impairment, naturally you have to transpose that information onto another sense. And in the visually impaired world, the go-to has been, let's put everything into audio cues. But if there is a way of incorporating haptics, so mobile phones, they all vibrate, and there's a lot of cues. Everyone is used to feeling the little vibration when you select something on an iPhone.
I do have to say, when I have my phone in my pocket, it always startles me when my phone vibrates, even though I know it's there. I mean, how stupid is that?
That happens to me too.
So, does it really? I don't feel so alone anymore.
That's not a visually impaired thing, man.
I was like, I know I put it there. Why am I surprised it's vibrating?
Not only that, but after a while, you start getting phantom vibrations. Was that my phone?
And I think the real key thing for me is making sure that all this stuff happens in the mainstream technology,
right?
So that visually impaired people or anyone with additional access requirements, they're not required to buy an additional piece of expensive hardware just to access.
Exactly.
See, we were talking about that, Daniel, before you got here, and we were saying there's a company, we're not naming any names, but there's a company that says their product's accessible, but for it to be accessible, you have to buy a very expensive piece of software. a very expensive piece of hardware, and then it becomes accessible for the blind. I am blessed that I can afford to do that, but many of my blind, friends and colleagues cannot afford to shell out another $2,000 to make a piece of software accessible. So is it really accessible? Is the question, I think. So we have multiple barriers. There's a financial barrier as well, and blind people are amazing and can do a lot of amazing things. But a lot of people that are blind do find it challenging to find jobs that can provide them with the right kind of income. And so that can be really challenging. There's a lot of people, we were talking about this earlier, that create these scripts that help the screen readers know what's on the screen for the blind practitioner. But most of the people making these scripts are unpaid, very just brilliant blind people who are not making any money from it, which means that it's very difficult for them to keep up with the constant change in software.
It's like open source stuff.
Right.
Exactly. So, yeah.
But if a lot of companies will say, and look, I get it, I'm a small business owner, I get it. There's only so much money in the budget, I understand. But if you were to get a group of people to put a little bit of money into helping pay these scripters to do what they do, and providing them with free copies of the software, that would be a lot easier than paying someone $100,000 a year to work for your company specifically. So I always thought, I don't know if you know, Daniel, and you probably go, and Jay, you may not know, but the story of RCA, Radio Company of America.
Sure.
I'm gonna oversimplify, but essentially you had a ton of people that had patents for radio. The Navy, the U.S. Navy, Marconi, Westinghouse, General Electric, and so eventually they said, hey guys, we're going to form Radio Company of America, and everybody's going to put their patents in here. Everybody's going to have a share of the profits, and that way we can make a radio. And I'm oversimplifying, but that's kind of what happened. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have a third party whose job it was to help provide access for a very small, say $5,000 a year or $10,000 a year, that would take your product, send it to an actual qualified blind coder, you know, and give them a little money so they could afford to stay on top of all the changes.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be really cool.
I mean, I can't speak
I'm dreaming.
to that. I can't speak to that directly. I don't have money. But like, you know, what we're doing at Sound Without Sight, and also what the Media Association are doing with their special interest group, which is all targeted towards accessibility stuff, is, you know, how can we make accessibility sustainable so it's not relying on open source coders, you know, so that there is support within the kind of mainstream product for all this stuff. And one thing we're looking at the moment is creating best practice kind of guidance so that developers have a starting point, they have a breadcrumb trail to pick up. So accessibility isn't such a overwhelming topic. Like we were talking about earlier, like within the companies themselves, they might not have lived experience yet. Obviously, we'd love that to be the case in the future, a more diverse workforce. But, you know, to give people something not as crude as a checklist, but like considerations.
Start.
Exactly.
Because it can be very overwhelming if you don't know anything about it. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I even begin to make something accessible?
But yeah, there are companies already doing some really, really good work. So again, we need to showcase that, try and like also document that, package it up, and try and like create a more industry-wide movement towards like, you know, this is the great work that's happening, this is how it was done. And I'm really hoping, and there are really positive signs that audio companies will be open to that. You know, a more collaborative approach to accessibility and keeping accessibility out of the domain of competition. Because, you know, it's not, realistically, it's not going to be a huge profit maker.
It's a small market, but there is a market.
But it's an important market.
It is.
And you know, Joey, you brought up something a minute ago that I kind of want to play on a little bit more, which was the idea of if you're doing audio cues, and we are audio people, at what point does that get overwhelming, and what other kinds of alternatives, besides haptic, for example, what other kinds of alternatives would we have in terms of making things more accessible, making our software and our hardware more accessible?
Well, I'll tell you what I've been preaching for the last little while. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only person to talk about this. I mean, I may not be. And Jay has certainly got an amazing network that he's put together. And so I may not be the only one talking about it. But I believe in all the hubbub about AI, the one thing that's missing, in fact, there was an AI panel here at NAMM just the other day, and I told my dear friend Julian Colbeck and Leslie from AES, I was like, hey guys, you forgot to mention the accessibility of AI could provide to the disabled. And they're like, oh my God.
That's an interesting point.
And so I really feel like, well, you know, look, eventually we're all gonna be murdered or asleep by robots, okay? It's coming. So you might as well just get ready. But I'm all for Isaac Asimov's three laws.
I love your attitude.
No, I mean, you know, if a few sighted people have to die so I can have access to a driverless car, you know, but in all seriousness, I really believe that AI has the ability to be my eyes or to be somebody else's hands.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
it makes a lot of sense.
And so it's I think that's the kind of thing where now we're talking about ways that AI can enhance humanity rather than the Luddite kind of idea of replacing humanity,
the fear, yeah, exactly.
And so, because look, as a music creative, and I know this is not our mandate today to talk about this, but I am not for AI creating music. I'm not. I mean, I'm a humanist. I want to be in control of the art form.
Well, that's the creative process, and AI is never going to replace that.
I mean, but I mean, like, but I really feel like, you know, if we could have a virtual assistant, and I could say, hey, computer, I want to insert the Fairchild compressor plug-in on track 17. Here's the ratio I want. Here's the threshold. Here's the gain adjustment. You know, and then that is done for me, rather than me trying to have to get something to tell me what's on the screen.
Yeah.
I think that's where we should be headed, because again, scripting is very challenging, and the accessibility breaks real easily. But if we
It's
could
not just that; it's
machine
also
learn-
counterintuitive.
It is, but if we can, but like, you know, the driverless cars, to get back to that, you know, when they test drive those driverless cars, they program them with traffic patterns, and here's what you do if this happens, and but if there's a traffic situation that the driverless car encounters that it has never encountered before, when that situation is solved or resolved, all of a sudden that goes to the cloud, and now all the driverless cars know what to do in that situation. So couldn't we do that with, if a blind person ran into a situation where, hey, you know, the AI didn't recognize XYZ, but now I've fixed it, I've told it how to manipulate it. Now everybody's, you got that machine learning. I just feel like that would be an amazing way.
In a small way, that is happening already. So in the talk that I did with the Media Association all around accessibility stuff a couple of days ago, I was talking about that with Lele Paravicini from Audio Modeling, and they were talking about their inclusive music project, and one of those things was an AI-based kind of voice or text input for plugins, and there's a plugin out already. I can't remember who actually makes it, but yeah, the first one that has a text box assistance where you can type what you want. You know, make this brighter, please, but not piercing. And yeah, that.
So can you be very specific? Like, hey, boost 10K by 3 dB.
That's my understanding. I've not used it
because that would be sweet.
But
Now, of course, it's going to have to be refined.
Yeah.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Again, as you say, you know, the AI eventually starts to sort of winnow down into the details, because again, you know, and your example of the self-driving car, Joey, exactly the same thing. The self-driving cars, when they first put them on the road, they did not have this bank of knowledge that they now have, and that continues to expand, and that's going to have to be the same thing, especially because, as you say, there's so much nuance in terms of, you know, your blindness is not his blindness, it's not her blindness, and on top of that, your methodology of working as a musician, as an engineer. You know, sighted people, every engineer works differently.
Everyone has different workflow. That's right.
You know? Not to mention different tastes.
Well, right. And like what Alan Parson does versus what Ross Hogarth does, both of them are friends of mine. Like they're radically different.
Absolutely.
And they're both geniuses.
There is no one size fits all for any element of being a musician, really. And you know,
well, that's what I wonder.
With my work at RNIB, people come to me. A lot of blind musicians come to me and ask, "What software can I use? What instruments can I use?" And it's there are a few that I can recommend very easily, but that's a shame. I wish I could say you can use anything.
Right.
You know, these are all the different things, and this is what styles. You know, it might be Ableton, for example. A lot of electronic music's made in Ableton. Not exclusive, but you know, broad strokes. That is its main use case.
Other people like Logic because it will do both, and for composers, more composers use Logic.
Right, absolutely.
And if you're running a studio session, you might want to use Pro Tools, you know, industry standard.
And that's the thing, because I'm tracking sometimes 48 tracks at a time, so I need something like Pro Tools is better for me. You know, but yeah, I mean, and you know, the other thing too is when we start talking about workflow and all this stuff. But there's all those things to consider, as we've said. But the other thing that I really like what Jay was saying is, I would just, the ultimate goal is to have the same choice as our sighted counterparts. Like to not to have to say, well, if you want to do this, you have to use X. You know, it'd be nice if I could say, well, I've played with choices A, B, C, D, and E, and I'm choosing C because that works best for me. Right now, we really haven't reached, or at least I don't think so. Maybe Jay, you have a perspective. I don't think we've reached that milestone yet.
Not quite.
Of having, like, you know, because there's so much cool stuff out there. I mean,
and it never stops.
It never stops.
That's the thing, you know. I mean, we all of us always marvel at people like Stevie Wonder, you know, who managed to get his head around some of the most complex stuff that had absolutely no accessibility at all.
None.
Now we have at least more of a consciousness of it now, but we also have way more overwhelming technology in general at this point. And that's a good and a bad thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I think that's where the usability side of stuff comes in, right? Because technology now is super, super complex, and it's only going to get more so. And how do we present that to any user in an accessible way? And I think if you if you design for certain communities and you improve the accessibility for blind users or for I don't know, users who struggle with a lot of complex information, ultimately you're improving the usability for everyone. You know, if you take a stage keyboard, if you have to dive through 3 layers of menus on a little screen to get the sound that you want,
well, that's going to piss off a sighted person, believe me.
Nobody's going to be happy.
Exactly. Ain't nobody got time for that.
That is the case, though. There are products like that.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
But if you simplify that workflow for everyone, that's great for everyone, right?
Yeah. And there again, that's where AI, if you say, hey, I need a Hammond B3 sound, if you could just tell it the software what you're looking for and have it recommend a few quick choices, and then you can tweak those or decide that the AI was wrong or whatever. But it's certainly, I mean, one of the things that we are doing with AI is it's helping you, like with ChatGPT or whatever, it's giving you like, okay, here are 5 different options to say what you want to say right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm still a fan of human creativity, but I do like the idea of AI being able to winnow things down to 5 choices that are probably what you're looking for.
Yeah, as opposed to just coming at
like
it from...
like 1,000.
Yeah, exactly.
And having to scroll through. And one of the things I honestly wanted to just like slam my head into a wall. I had a client who spent one day with me. Literally, we paged through reverbs for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and I said, are you sure you want to spend your studio time paging through reverbs for 3 hours? Yeah, and from my perspective, that was nuts. But they're paying me for the hour, whatever.
Well,
that's just nuts.
Yeah, but that here again, this is an issue not just for this is an issue for every musician. I call it the paralysis of analysis. We have so many choices. I have probably about 30 or 40 virtual synths on my computer. I'm looking for one damn sound. And the idea of AI being able to, for me to say, I want, a string-ish, horn-ish pad, with this much sustain, as opposed to leafing through 100 different sounds
and then
flagging maybe 3 or 4 and then going back again, And
then say, hey, I want a clav sound like Stevie Wonder used on Superstition. I mean,
exactly.
That'd be awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is, as you say, if we can improve that for blind people, we can improve that for everybody.
And Jay's really right. I mean, when you think about it, accessibility is almost the wrong word. He's right. Usability is really the word that we should be focused on, because usability for everyone is going to make it better, like just a better experience. And that's going to really help, because it really is. If it's, like I said, if it's not accessible, it's not really usable, is it? I mean, it's it needs to be. And again, as Jay aptly said, I mean, it is overwhelming to try and think, as we circle back around from what we talked about at the beginning of the interview. It is overwhelming when you're starting from a place where you have no experience.
Right.
So, but that's the one reason that it's great to have some blind advocates like Jay and I, who you can come to and say, how do I even get started?
Yeah.
How does this even start?
That's the core idea behind Sound Without Sight.
Yeah.
To create this kind of online hub where blind and partially sighted musicians can come together and kind of offer that support, documenting people's journeys and the solutions that they found along the way, so that hopefully it won't be quite so overwhelming.
And
you can pick up those breadcrumb trails, those stepping stones.
And most of us are more than willing to give of our time to help with beta testing and all kind of stuff.
So do you have a large community of people who are involved in beta testing, product development, and feedback and stuff like that? Are you guys welcome? I mean, I know you're working with the MIDI Association.
Yeah, so I mean, part of what we're doing is trying to pull that together, and also from the developer side, try and get them to put value on that inclusive participatory design. So getting communities involved during the design process rather than trying to bolt it on at the end, because that's difficult. Trying to retrospectively implement accessibility stuff is hard.
Well, from an engineering perspective, it's ridiculous, because the further down the road you get, the more things you're going to have to undo.
And that's why I've always said, when I talk to companies about accessibility, and I say, gosh, I would love to buy your product, but it's not accessible. I'm like, look, forget about version 7 that's on the market now. Let's think about version 8. And try to make the accessibility something you bake in from the beginning.
Yeah. And how successful have you been with that?
I'd say probably about 65%.
What's your biggest roadblock?
Well, it all comes down to like money. You know, like people feel like, I mean, well, you know, what I hear a lot is we know that. I literally had someone say this to me the other day. We know that we should have accessibility. We're sorry we don't, but we have no plans to make our product accessible in the near future.
I wonder what the roadblock to that is, though, because I think it's probably awareness within the developer community of how to do the stuff. Because they think the resources, they've got to start from scratch, and they've got to put so much into it.
That's right.
I
think morally and ethically, you can always say this is the right thing to do. And I'll tell you something, from my perspective, I feel so good about giving to companies that are doing things outside of their comfort zone. Like, it makes me excited to say, like, certain companies I'd like to support, like, because they think about accessibility.
Of course.
Like, man, I'm so glad to give you my money. Like, I'm so excited. So I think from a business standpoint and from a PR standpoint, it's a great idea as well. It's not just, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of a jaded perspective, I guess, but it's true.
No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And you know, we see the same thing when we talk about inclusivity, you know, with more women in the industry and everything.
Yeah.
A lot of us are to the point where, you know, politically conscious, whatever you want to call it, but, you know, of course we want to support those companies that are advocating for inclusivity. No question about that. But, you know, you raised an interesting point with the whole economies of scale there. You know, is there enough of a market for these companies to want to put in the extra time, energy, money that it takes to develop these kinds of assets?
I think there's one really big market that gets forgotten, which is the education market.
Yes.
So every school, university, college has a responsibility to buy equipment, to buy gear, to buy software that is going to be accessible to all the students that go to that establishment.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, because the educational community is usually at the forefront of something like that.
Absolutely.
It's a shame that it gets overlooked because, you know, if people use a certain piece of software in their education, they're going to want to use it when they become professional. So it's like you have to
win
look
them over early.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, there are some numbers. I'm going to say this with a slight amount of skepticism, okay? Because numbers can be made to say a lot of things. But
What
there
do
are
they
some
say?
numbers,
90% of the statistics are made up on
Absolutely.
the spot. Yeah, there you go.
But there are some numbers that suggest that roughly 25% of people in the U.S. do identify as some kind of disability. So that's a market that's not insignificant. The other thing is, and I don't mean this in a like Debbie Downer kind of way, but the fact is, tomorrow is promised to nobody, and tomorrow you might have the disability. And so from that perspective of preparing as people age, let's say there's a famous musician who's like one of the most gifted, you know, musicians in the world, and as they age, they develop some health issues that prevents them from participating in the craft that they have revolutionized.
You've described a whole bunch of musicians, right? Yeah.
And why would we want to throw away all that experience and talent because they're a little bit hard of hearing, or their eyesight's not as good as it used to be, or their hands aren't as steady as they used to be? So, I mean, I think planning for that eventuality is also something to kind of take into consideration. Because I know people right now that are like, just, you know, to me, paradigm shifting artists and engineers and producers who are aging and are slowing down a little bit. And that's okay, but we shouldn't lose that population because something's no longer accessible.
Yeah, no, that is one of the core groups of customers that I support at RNIB. Is people who, you know, they've been a professional musician their whole life, but they can no longer, for example, read sheet music.
Right.
And, you know, what technology or what support is there available to either, you know, increase the size of sheet music, blow it up on a tablet, and there are solutions that do that very well. Or it might be someone's lost their sight completely. How do they begin to learn Braille music, for example? Or is that the most appropriate route? And there's so many questions. I just really look forward to creating some resources to support that community.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, you know, the idea of engineering aging, and when I say aging, it encompasses such a wide spectrum of what shall I say, potential maladies, you know, potential hindrances, you know. And I mean, you know, look, there are people who go through macular degeneration.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I mean, it's not something that is just this little group of people that we can afford to ignore, because And you put it so well, Joey. Tomorrow is promised to no one. Everything can change on a dime.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just so important, I think, to be able to engineer. I mean, use all of this knowledge and wisdom that we have here to be able to accommodate not just people who are in some way handicapped or challenged, but, you know, if you think about it, man, all of us have some kind of handicap,
everybody's
you know?
got something.
I mean, whether we're neurodiverse or whatever,
Right,
you know,
right.
I mean, I would venture to say that a very, very high percentage of musicians in general, creative people in general, are somewhere on the spectrum.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, we're all freaking nuts.
Yeah.
If we weren't, we wouldn't be
And
in this
proud of
industry.
it.
Exactly right. Thank you. And so, you know, from that perspective, I'm just thinking the more inclusive we can be,
Yeah.
you know,
It's a better world.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. You know, and I know we sound like, you know, hippie flower children singing Kumbaya, but, you know, it's really
I will sing Kumbaya with you any day, my friend.
damn right, man. Absolutely.
In 3-part harmony.
Yeah.
I really like the shift that's happened recently in the last few years, the more kind of social model of disability, where it's not seen like as the person that has the deficit, it's the environment that they're in, not being able to, that's what's creating the barriers. And I think that's really true. If you look at people who've been musicians their whole lives, they've got the skills to be a musician, they're amazing musicians.
Yeah.
Suddenly their sight changes or something else happens that means that, you know, what they're used to, the tools they're used to using, you know, they're not accessible anymore. It's not a deficiency in the person.
Well, you know, going back to the conversation we were having earlier about people in wheelchairs, for example, you know, I spent many years living in Europe, and one of the things that amazed me was that because a lot of the structures there are so much older, it's a lot harder for wheelchair-bound people, for example. And I'm sure that extends to visually impaired people as well. You know, you've got all of these challenges, and that is the same thing that's true here in the States. I would say probably even more so on the East Coast, where the infrastructure is older.
Right,
You know, you're
right.
fighting a lot of these basically built-in challenges and
Right.
handicaps, you know. And I think getting around those I mean, that's a challenge no matter what your quote-unquote disability is.
Yeah. Well, it's just like my parents. I mean, you know, we have a 2-story house, you know, when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
Now my mom can't get up those stairs. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
she's 81 and just can't do it. So I mean, you there are a lot of built-in sort of accessibility challenges that again kind of get back to as our population ages, things become less accessible in general. So but I think the big thing is, you know, one of the things, and I'm mostly joking here, okay? So, you know,
Mostly?
I tease, mostly. I tease a lot of my students like, oh, you're such a millennial. I give them a hard time on some stuff. But one of the things I'm so proud of the millennial generation of, is they are so open to talking about things that used to be kind of taboo.
Yes.
Or, you know, and
Yes.
it's like they talk about disability. They talk about all these things in a way that when I was a kid, just you never would have. And I'm really excited by that the conversation has started. People are engaging. It's better now than it ever has been before, even though in some ways it's more challenging, because as we enter into what I call the screen-driven universe, where everything has a screen, that's kind of a problem if you can't see. And one of the things that happened to me just the other day in the hotel that we're staying here at NAMM, you have to push the button outside the elevator as to what floor you want to go to. And then a little light lights up to tell you which elevator to go to. But there's no audio cue of any kind. So if my wife went in there, I would not know what elevator to get in to go to my floor.
Yeah.
So in the screen-driven universe, there are some new challenges, but the good news is that people are interested in having the conversation like we're having today. And I think interested in more and more in solving the problems.
Yeah. I think the more you have those conversations as well, the more comfortable people get, because like I get the sense sometimes people feel like a little bit like treading on eggshells because I don't want to offend anyone.
Right.
I'm
Right.
If you want to have a conversation with me, I'm not going to be offended if you use some language that
Well, and
maybe
the
is not
fact
You
is-
this.
should be able to have those conversations,
Exactly.
warts and all.
And you know what?
Exactly, yeah.
If you're looking to be offended, you will be. You know
Well,
what I mean?
yeah, exactly right.
So you
yeah.
just meet people where they are and assume that their intentions are good until they prove otherwise.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and it's funny to me because again, and I'll refer back to the artist that I worked with who was wheelchair bound. A lot of times people would try and mince their words, and she would just lay into them, and not in a mean way
No,
or
no.
anything.
Yeah,
but, like,
Don't worry so much.
I'm
It's
right
good.
here.
Yeah,
I'm down here.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most wonderful thing, to be
Yeah.
able to just say, hey, look,
You should see the crazy stuff we do in my studio.
Yeah.
And how disrespectful my bandmates are to me. It's fantastic.
Look, I've heard you make some really damn good blind jokes. Okay.
I do collect them.
Yeah, and I think that to me is really, in a way, that's what we need, because we need to be able to normalize it.
Yes.
In order
If
to be
you
able to
can't
talk
be
about it and
honest
address
what
it.
you need, then you can't be helped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each of you, I know that Jay, you work with the MIDI Association.
Yeah.
And Joey, I'm assuming that you also work with a lot of companies.
Yeah, I do. I don't have an official association or anything. I've kind of gotten known as when someone has a question in like the Grammys or the like.
Oh yeah,
NARS
you're a
or-
troublemaker,
or
man.
AES.
Everybody knows
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, call Joey and ask him.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he'll be glad to talk your ear off.
But I think that's so great because a lot of people are just, they kind of give up.
Yeah.
And
too dumb to quit.
Yeah, and you can't, man. It's like with anything else, persistence. To the point where you're just banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
Eventually, something works.
Well, the one thing that I believe and that I was raised to believe is if you don't try, the answer's no.
Yep.
And if you try, you got a shot.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'll take that. I will give everything. I mean, it's a silly story, but I wanted to meet Brian Henson and tell him that the Henson family with the Muppet Show was so important in my life as a child, keeping me happy and positive when I was so sick in the hospital. And they came out and said, we were standing in line to get his autograph at a conference, and they came out and said, hey, Brian's got to go. You can stay in line, but there's a good chance he's not going to get to you. And my friend was like, oh, we might as well go. I was like, If I leave, I know I don't get to shake his hand and say thank you. But if I stay, maybe I do. So I stayed an hour, and I did get to shake his hand and say thank you. I know that's a silly story, but I mean, it encapsulates like how I feel. It's like if I participate, if I advocate, if I go out and be the change, even if I get turned down 1,000 times, maybe 1,001 I don't.
Uh-huh.
And that's just I'm content with that.
Well, that has to do with anything in our careers.
Anything. Yeah. Anything.
I mean, so many things that I know I would not have accomplished if I didn't try.
Well, and some people go, man, that's crazy, but look at the people they thought were crazy. The Wright brothers they thought were crazy, right? I mean,
We're all crazy.
Yeah.
So
we're all
just
crazy,
go up there
but-
and dream your dream and give it a shot.
Yeah,
We're all
absolutely.
stubborn as well.
Absolutely.
You've got to
Yes.
be stubborn.
You gotta be
You call
stubborn.
it stubborn or you call it determined
Yeah,
or driven,
the-
but like...
However you want to say it.
The
Yeah.
word is tenacious.
Yeah.
Tenacious.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the politically correct
I
word.
like
yeah.
it.
Yeah. So what do you, what's your attitude towards the future of development of accessible instrumentation? Do you feel like we're actually making a lot of progress at this point?
I think there's so much momentum right now. Like
Yeah.
if you look at where we were a couple of years ago when I first got involved in these conversations, there was a lot of tumbleweed at that point. That is not there anymore. So many companies are engaged, even though they don't know like exactly what to do next. Like there's interest, like genuine interest, which is great, and like that's why the MIDI Association is doing this special interest group related to accessibility. There are so many partners within the MIDI Association, and there's just so much potential right now, and I'm really really excited to see what happens next.
Nice.
And I got a chance to when you and I met, Jay, at the symposium Queen Mary did back in 2022. One of the people that was speaking at that virtually was a lady named Amy, and she had just been hired. I don't know if you remember this. She had just been hired by Ableton as their accessibility full-time staff person.
Oh, cool.
And she has a doctorate in accessibility. And that was just such an exciting thing. And as we are speaking today, Ableton has rolled out beta testing for Ableton Live, which is a really awesome program for the blind community. Now, I don't know where it's at or any of the details. You might.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as much as I know.
Yeah.
But I know, app-wide, there's awesome accessibility and like just the progress that's been made in that year and a half.
I mean, it's exciting, and I think what I love, the reason I'm calling Ableton out here and saying this is because it is one of the most visual programs ever.
That's true.
And so they have said, okay, we're gonna meet that. We're gonna work on making this the most visual program ever accessible to the blind, and they've hired a full-time staff person to help make that dream a reality. And so it can be done. And so I really applaud them, because a lot of what people say, and justifiably so, is they say, I just don't know if we can afford a full-time staff person. I don't know if we can make our product that's so visual accessible. And I get that. I understand what you're saying. But Ableton is showing that it can be done. Now, what success we're going to have with it, I don't know, because they've just rolled out the beta testing, and I'm not on that team. So I don't really have the inside scoop per se. But I am very excited to see that.
You hear that, Ableton?
Yeah, you hear that, Ableton? That's right. But I was just really excited to just see that. And because there's some things that Ableton does, like I have some of the sighted like interns and stuff that work at my studio, can do things that will take me half an hour and like 5 minutes using Ableton, because they just like click, 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 drag, drag, drag.
Yeah.
You know, especially like when it comes to like quantizing and all this kind of stuff, sampling.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's exciting. I think the future is going to be bright, and it just requires you stay the course, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking.
Yeah,
Which
I think
both
the
of us
signs
do pretty well.
The signs there are super positive. I mean, Ableton did really great work with that iOS app, Ableton Note. I don't know if you played with that, Joey.
I haven't.
But yeah, I mean, I've had a play. It's great. It's got really, really good reviews on Apple Viz, which is a kind of open kind of review site for visually impaired users. Yeah, really, really good positive reviews on there. So yeah, the whole team at Ableton done a great job.
Love it. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen?
I just want to say that my wife tells me you're a charming and handsome man, and I'm glad to sit in your company.
Oh, gosh. All right, tell your wife I'll slip her a 10 later.
Oh, I thought it was a 20. Because half of it's mine.
It's Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Discount day, man.
Discount day. In all seriousness, we have known each other for a long time virtually.
We have,
and it's such a pleasure to actually get to be in your company. So thank you for having us today.
Likewise, man.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
I'm really glad we were able to do this. I'm glad we were able to manage this into the schedule. Jay, I've just recently learned about your work through my work with the MIDI Association, and I'm really, really glad to see that. Joey, you and I have been on AES mentoring teams together and whatnot, and I love what you guys are doing. I think we need more inclusivity on every single level in our industry, and so I am just thrilled to see it, man. Absolutely.
Thank you so much,
gentlemen.
I'm really excited.
Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much,
Joey.
My friend, a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.